Well, Razorback fans, we know that in basketball over the past few years, we've heard that Arkansas is going to improve their three-point shooting, but it never really happened. Is this going to be the year that Arkansas finally improves their three-point shooting? Let's talk about in today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the Pod at the Palace edition. John Neighbors alongside Curtis Wilkerson for this one. And Curtis, I don't know, kind of what we teased there a little bit in the opening. I wish I had a nickel for every time I assume you've been asked or been like talked to or criticized, whatever it's been, about Arkansas's three-point shooting under Muss. Like, Muss did a lot of great things, but three-point shooting just never seemed to be a strength of the Razorbacks over the past few years.
Yeah, and apparently it's not that big of a deal, according to what he said on that interview a few days ago, that clip that went viral. Yeah, man, it's pretty interesting. A national champion is not ranked outside the top 75 nationally in three-point percentage since North Carolina in 2017. So it's been a minute. But yeah, to speak to it under Muss, that was always a glaring issue that he just never really seemed to address. Arkansas's ranking in three-point percentage the last 5 seasons under Muss nationally: number 172, number 195, number 316, number 317, and number 280. So yeah, not pretty under Muss.
Okay. See, I knew it was bad. I guess I didn't realize it was that bad, being ranked there. Because, I mean, in college basketball, different ways to win and all that, but it seems like I feel like it's almost like somebody's still running the wishbone type of thing in college football, where it's like, how do you succeed without three-point shooting? But it doesn't matter now, because before, hey, that's long gone. Got a new coach in Cal, and he's had success in a lot of ways, but it seems like, at least in the previous years, offense has been a big key. Three-point shooting has been a big key. So we know what the roster is. Is Arkansas actually going to have legitimate threats in three-point shooting this year?
Yeah, buddy, we'll see. And interestingly enough, I just gave you the rundown of the 5 seasons under Muss, the national rankings. Kentucky's rankings in three-point percentage under John Calipari the last 5 years: number 115, number 172, number 101, number 137. Oh, last year they were number 1 in the country. So
okay.
It seemed like things were trending in the right direction there at the end. So that was kind of cool. The thing with Arkansas, though, is it hasn't just been poor percentages. It's been a lack of volume that I think has really been frustrating the last few years here. They've averaged between 5 and 6 made threes per game. That's just not going to get it done in this era of basketball. If you're only shooting, 32% as a team from 3, but you're making 9 to 10 per game, okay. But if you're shooting 32% or lower as a team from 3 and you're making 5 a game, that becomes a problem. It's math, right? Like 3 versus 2. And that's why, getting to the free throw line and FTAs, that was such a big emphasis under Muss, because they couldn't make threes. I do think that this Arkansas team, as constructed, can shoot a decent percentage from 3, but I'm not sure there's going to be that much volume there. And so that's a little bit of what I'm worried about with this group. Nelly Davis, he does both: high percentage, high volume. Dude can absolutely stroke it from 3. He's going to be really, really good there. But then you start looking around. DJ Wagner, he made about a 3 per game. He shot under 30%. How much is he going to improve with that freshman to sophomore leap? Dude Thiero, he's made 10 3-pointers in 2 years. Got to be better. Jonas Adu, not a shooter. So you start looking at some of the veteran guys who've been in college and done this before. Do you really believe now what Cal said about Trevin Brazile and Big Z? I don't. Go ahead and bookmark this. Cal said Big Z and Brazile are not going to be shooting threes. I'm telling you right now, that's major hat, because they're both 2 of the better shooters on this team. Arkansas has to have both of those big guys knocking down threes, or it's going to be a big time issue for them. And they're going to have to rely on freshmen, man, where you just never know until you get those guys in a college uniform and see how it translates. Boogie Flan needs to be a legit threat from deep, percentage-wise, and in terms of volume. Does he profile as a guy who can do that? Absolutely, but we're not going to know until we see it. And they're also going to need Carter Knox to be a threat out there. He shot like 27% from three at Overtime Elite, which is not good. But the way he played with the ball in his hands, taking tough, contested, forced shots, that shot selection is going to be way better at Arkansas. I do think Carter Knox is a guy that could shoot at 33% or higher. But yeah, I mean, you go through and look, there's not a lot of proven track record there. So percentage, sure. When it comes to volume, I don't know if it's going to be their strong suit. Time will tell.
Well, I know you talked about like the teams that, or the guys that transferred in, you know, we saw kind of what they did at high level college basketball and everything. And I know I keep bringing up the past, but that was what under Muss, you had guys that at their previous schools and whatnot were shooting maybe not the highest of high 3-point percentages, but pretty solid at times, and at high major college basketball programs too. And then when they came in, it wasn't that at all. So I guess my question is like, was that more of a more of a volume thing where they just shot more and attempted more threes at Arkansas, which made their percentage go down? Or because I just always wonder what changed. You know, you shoot every day. How do you have that much worse of a percentage time and time and time again? And how do you avoid that under Cal to make sure that doesn't happen for these other guys at their previous schools?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, don't want to bash on the guy that left, but there were some confidence killer vibes in certain situations there. You think about Jackson Robinson and Chris Likes, and I mean, there are a lot of examples of guys who are good shooters or had proven that they were good shooters, and for whatever reason, it just kind of got worse at Arkansas. But Muss was a very reactionary coach also, so if they had 2 games where they did not shoot well from three, or he felt like they were settling and not getting to the rack and drawing fouls, he put the red light on him, man. And all of a sudden you would see Arkansas teams attempting 12, 13 threes a game, or he's telling them not to shoot them at all. That kind of stuff gets in your head. And so it was like the volume was almost forced not to be there. And in a way I understand it, because if your team's not shooting a high percentage, you want them to take shots that they're more, apt to make, I guess. But at the same time, that stuff kind of gets into your head a little bit. The only example I can really think of off the top of my head of a guy who really shot the three better at Arkansas than he did his previous stop, Stanley Amude.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty decent shooter at South Dakota, but he really, really came on strong for Arkansas in that season. But yeah, I mean, you think about those guys last year, it's Caleb Battle. It's probably fairly close, but L. Ellis dropped off a cliff. You think about Jeremiah Davenport. He's a huge example of that. Just did not translate for him. I think about Vance Jackson, who was a great shooter all those years in New Mexico. He couldn't even get on the court at Arkansas. So, I mean, you're going to need that to translate. Cal seems like he's kind of been pushing hey, we need you guys to be able to shoot it and knock it down. And have confidence doing so. So get in and get your reps, and we'll see. He had 1 year. It was a couple years ago with one of his rosters where they almost average as few attempts from three per game as Arkansas did. I think they shot like 17 threes per game. That's really low. But they were really letting that thing fly last year. So hopefully that's the case again if they can knock them down.
Well, and I just want to correct something before we move on too. Curtis, I just think you're getting a little over the top. I don't think there's any evidence to show that Eric Musselman was reactionary. I think there's no evidence showing that whatsoever anywhere. So we need to be very careful on these accusations. But no,
yeah, you're right.
I say there's a few things everyone knew about Eric Musselman. I think reactionary was definitely one way to describe it. So, but yeah, that's 3-point shooting, but also another big thing in college basketball and just in sports in general is about depth. We'll talk about that coming up next year on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. All right, folks, we know it's still summertime and getting ready to go to school and having all the sports start coming up again when it comes to football season and everything. But to get to all these events, you got to have tickets. And with the Gametime app, it is the best app when it comes to buying all your tickets. And it doesn't matter if it's just for sports. It's also for concerts. It's for comedy shows. It's for everything of these events. Gametime is your place. If you download the app, you'll be able to see exactly all the different deals that they have to offer. Like they have last minute deals where you save up to 60% off on last minutes for all the sports and concerts, comedy, theater, everything. If you buy at the last minute, there's always a chance you can save up to 60%. You also have flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. They also have all-in pricing settings because we all get frustrated if we see a price, think we're getting a great deal, and go through these steps, and then the price is not what originally we anticipated. Well, you don't have to worry about that with Gametime. They give you the all-in price up front to let you know exactly what you're going to be paying for with no hidden fees. So take the Gametime app and go and download it by creating an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your very first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, continuing on with the Locked On Razorbacks Pod at the Palace edition. 3-point shooting obviously was important, but now depth, Curtis. This was something where Cal comes in and he didn't have a team, and he put together a team. And once it got to like that 7-8 amount of players, it started coming out that that's all he needs. It's all he's going to have. He only needs those many. It's kind of like weird for people to even comprehend that, considering you get 13 scholarships. So now we know what the roster looks like. I mean, what does the depth look like right now for Arkansas?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, I think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for us to really praise the good things about this team and how good they could be and why they could make a deep run. But they're not perfect. And there's some flaws there, and at least some things that you look at on the surface and say, if there were some things that could hold Arkansas back, what would they be? And 3-point shooting stands out. And the other is depth. Muss, he had too many pieces and he couldn't find the ones to fit together last season. It was weird. It was too much. Cal felt like he had too many mouths to feed, especially when they were healthy last year at Kentucky. And I agree with that. So I understand where he's coming from with this, we're going to go 9 deep, the end philosophy. On paper, it's a dang good 9. I mean, it's an elite level 9, but it is a risky move, man. I mean, we got to be objective here. I can't help but think about some of the Houston teams in recent years. Kelvin Sampson, he's had championship level teams that have fallen short in a couple NCAA tournaments because they've gotten hit with some injuries and they didn't have the depth to replace it when they really needed to. Last year in the NCAA tournament, it was Jamal Shedd, All-American guard. He went down. You just couldn't replace it. They had also lost this 5-star in Terrence Arsenault earlier in the season. So that's 2 really important pieces that are down. Your minutes are just going to increase for everybody else that's in your rotation. But at some point, you got to have guys who can really step in and help you out there. A couple years ago, Houston was the number 1 team in the country in like every single metric. They lost 2 starters during conference play, and then they got bumped early in the NCAA tournament because they didn't have the depth to go replace them. So Arkansas might be able to absorb one, injury depending on the position, but it gets really iffy after that. So they're going to have to stay healthy, John, but also the other part that people don't really think about here, you can make a deep run with 9 guys if all 9 guys can play, right? And I don't know that we know that for sure. So did Arkansas hit on every transfer, or all of these freshmen going to pop? Because if not, it could get a little bit iffy. And I think a very good example of that was Kansas last season. DeJuan Harris, Kevin McCullough, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, like that's the best 4-man combo in the country easily. I don't think it was even close. But then they just didn't have enough. Like you had Arterio Morris from Texas. He got kicked off with the sexual assault case. Wasn't on the team. You couldn't have him. So what do? They turned to a 5-star freshman in Marco Jackson. Turns out he wasn't ready for a starting role yet, and he really struggled. They didn't get what they thought they would out of him. Okay, fine. They got a transfer guard in Nick Timberlake. He's a 40% career 3-point shooter from 3. Wound up being a bust because he just wasn't able to translate his game from a mid-major to the Big 12. So the preseason number 1 team played with 4 dudes all season. And then Kevin McCullough got hurt in the NCAA tournament. Next thing you know, they get bounced in the round of 32. So we know these 3 freshmen for Arkansas are really talented, but they need to be ready to be day 1 SEC contributors.
Well, and also some too, when you talked about injuries, I was just thinking in my mind, the past 4 or 5 years, I guess, at Arkansas, there hasn't really been a year where you haven't had an injury of some sort happen that was, impactful. Obviously, his first year when Isaiah Joe was out, I think 5 games, something like that. I mean, that that took a toll. The next year, like, it's not to say that they were out for significant periods of time every time, but I know you remember Justin Smith had a time where he was, got banged up, and you could tell it wasn't like fully the same. The next year, I remember Au'Diese Toney, I felt like they were just pumping him with painkillers a lot of times because he was banged up. And of course, we know about Trevin Brazil, Nick Smith, like all these other things. So point is that every year you're going to have guys who are banged up. You're going to have guys that are injured and sometimes miss games. And I'm with you. That's kind of the concerning thing I have, which I know Cal said something to the extent of, it doesn't matter who you are. If your best player gets hurt, doesn't matter how many players you have, you're going to get burned. I get it, but it's also like, I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'd rather be more prepared than not.
Yes.
To try to make it work. So I don't know. I just have a feeling that in theory and an idea, it seems like it's good, but knowing that injuries and craziness always happens in sports, it just seems, I don't know, it seems scary and risky.
It does. Yeah. And if you look at the roster, like, we know Trevin Brazil can really play. We know what his ceiling is. Can he stay healthy? I mean, he hasn't the last 2 years. DJ Wagner, we know what his ultimate ceiling is. He's still nursing an ankle injury from last season. So how close to 100% is he going to be when they really get rolling? Big Z, he hasn't played a full season of college basketball yet. He didn't even get into the lineup until January because of the eligibility stuff he was dealing with. So he wasn't hurt, but still, how's a 7'2", 240-pound man going to handle a full offseason and season and SEC slate? That's asking a lot. Adou Thiero has missed some time with some back stuff in the past. So like, there is a track record for some of these guys having to miss some time, and that going into it, and you only have 9. And so, yeah, I understand his thing about, well, in UMass, we had some injuries and we played with 6, and those 6 were really happy. Well, yeah, I mean, that would still be the case, but the SEC is built different nowadays, man. And if you're asking guys to play 37, 38 minutes per game, every game, eventually it's going to wear on them, and it's going to happen at the worst time when you get into the NCAA tournament. So, hey, Arkansas stays healthy, and if all these guys hit the way we think they will and meet their potential, I mean, I could see this team making a Final Four run. Of course, they're talented enough, but you need a lot of things to go right, and you don't really have a lot of answers to turn to if anything goes wrong.
Yeah, I was trying to think of, we saw Arkansas have players that averaged on the season like 38, 39 minutes a game. And I was thinking that would be something that changed under Cal, but if they're going to have this amount of players, you might not. I wonder, is it like, just before we get out of here, is it like, who do you think is going to be the player that gets, just for a prediction, like the most minutes per game at the end of the season? And also, how many minutes do you think that ends up being?
Nelly Davis just immediately jumps off the page at me as probably being that guy. Given the rotation, I think he's going to play 32 plus minutes per game for sure.
Yeah.
And probably like when they're in the dog days of the SEC, that's probably going to be higher. And if the staff is smart, and I think they are, when they have some of these non-conference games under control, it's just like, are we going to pull Taylon Green, after the third quarter against UAPB? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Are you going to pull Nelly Davis when you're up by 40 against Maryland Eastern Shore in the second half? Hopefully. Let Kareem Watkins get in there and get some run, man, whatever. And so there are ways that you can. I'm not going to use load management because that's a buzz term around Fayetteville after the Nick Smith situation, but you can be smart early and then, kind of ride the horses there late. That's probably what they're going to have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Arkansas fans just got used to, with the Nornerson and Mike Anderson days, it's like your leading minutes per game guy was like 28, 29 minutes a game. Yeah. So it's just, that's not the case anymore, but still, do they have the depth? Do they have 3-point shooting? I guess we're going to have to wait and find out once this season gets going. But appreciate everybody listening into the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, the Pod at the Palace edition. For Curtis Wilkerson, I'm John Neighbors. Same sports show, same sports channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you then.